For people who lived in the mountains, ghost sightings were a common phenomenon. If one saw their grandfather or late kin standing right in front of them in the middle of the day, it was quite natural. It was a ghost, and people knew that. The dead crossed over to the other world but left their tales behind. Those tales were, however, passed down from generation to generation. Though the facts were not accurate, it did not matter. Such was a place called Greenbrier County. Life was tough in the Greenbrier. People had to work in the fields to make ends meet. For them, more family members meant more hands, but they ignored the fact that it also meant more mouths to feed. The children and the elderly never survived more than a decade, and epidemics swept through the land every few years. But factors such as these made the people how they were, and one such person was Erasmus Stribbling Shue, also known as Trout, as he came from the Trout Valley. Shue was born to Jacob Shue in Mossy Creek in Fayette County. By profession, Jacob was a blacksmith who barely earned a minimum wage to keep his family going. However, his father's unsuccessful career did not dissuade Shue from following in his footsteps. Shue soon joined his father's business. However, after some time, Jacob moved to Droop Mountain in West Virginia with his family. It was this place where the Civil War had claimed the lives of many and made people homeless. Arriving there, Shue started work as a blacksmith at a shop belonging to James Crookshanks. Here, he met Zona. Zona Heaster Shue was born at the foot of Little Sewell Mountain, north of Meadow Bluff. She never left Greenbrier County in her lifetime. Being a middle child with 4 brothers raised in a religious home, she had a brief life. In 1895, when Zona was around 22 years old, she gave birth to a child with a man named George Wooldridge, who had no money, no job, and didn't want to take responsibility of a child he wasn't sure belonged to him, so he ran away. Zona used to visit her cousins in Falling Spring, about 25 miles away from Little Sewell. It was here that she met Shue and fell in love with him. In Shue, she found the respite and stability she had been looking for, something more than a one-night stand. In no time, the two fell deeply in love with each other. But Shue was almost a decade older than her and had been married twice. Being a domestic abuser, his first wife had run away from him, and the second one, being a 16-year-old, had died 8 months after marriage, pregnant with a child who was never heard of again. It was assumed that mother and child were buried somewhere in an unmarked cemetery of the county. However, these facts were not strong enough to keep Zona away from Shue. Zona's mother, Mary Ann, was opposed to their marriage. She instantly filled with dislike and distrust the moment she laid eyes on Shue, but she couldn't talk sense into her daughter and let them get married at the Methodist Church in Livesay's Mill. They got a 2-story house that once belonged to the father of Livesay's Mill, William G. Livesay, and their happy married life started, but it was far from that. As the new year of 1897 came, Zona took ill. It was Dr. George W. Knapp, a local practitioner who took care of her in those days. People started gossiping she was perhaps pregnant, speculating that to be the reason for their hasty marriage. But whatever the reason for her illness may be, it was on the morning of January 22, 1897, when it was blistering cold in the Rhinelands, where the couple lived. Shue went to work. On his way, he went to an acquaintance's house and requested her son to help his wife pick up some eggs. Though her son was busy that day, she promised she would make him go to his house. Anderson, the son, arrived at Shue's house after lunch and waited by the door, knocking. However, there was no answer. Being impatient and also in a hurry, he let himself in and discovered the body of Zona Heaster Shue lying at the foot of the stairs. Her one hand was on her abdomen and the other stretched out. She had her head turned slightly to one side and eyes wide open as if staring. He freaked out and went running back to his mother. After hearing this, she and her son ran to tell Shue. Dr. Knapp was called after that. Dr. Knapp reached Shue's house to find him hugging his wife's body. He had already washed and dressed her in a high-neck dress and wrapped a scarf around her neck, which was out of sync, but he insisted it was her favorite. The doctor started examining the dead body, only to be hindered by Trout several times, who seemed agitated being disturbed in his time of grief. The doctor finally gave up and determined the cause of death to be everlasting faint, which is now known as a heart attack, but later changed to childbirth. An investigation was started. However, the ever-changing accounts of the witnesses left the case hanging, reaching no firm conclusion, and ultimately let it close. Dr. Knapp informed the Heasters about their daughter's death. A funeral was organized for her. The whole time, Trout paced the room and refused to let go of his late wife's body. He cradled her head several times, put pillows under it, and also folded a sheet to make her rest comfortably. But she was at last buried in the graveyard at Soul Methodist Church on January 25th. Her mother, Mary Ann Heaster, refused to believe in any of the reasons stated as the cause of her death. She had not favored Shue from the very beginning, and the sudden death of her daughter spiked her suspicions on him even further. Being a God-fearing woman and strong-willed, she prayed day in and day out to God to reveal the truth to her. She begged for her daughter to return and tell her the truth. It paid off at last. On a dark and moonless night, a white light appeared to Mary Ann, but faded away in that instant. The following night, her daughter Zona appeared, in flesh and blood, and told her mother the true story of her death. On the day she was discovered dead, Shue had come home late that night, pissed off. He got mad seeing she had cooked no meat for supper. Running into a fit of rage, he overpowered her and choked her to death. His hard grip had mashed her windpipe, tearing the ligaments open and finally broken her neck between the first and second vertebrae. To prove her point, she rotated her head at 360 degrees to show it was really broken. Mary Ann ran to the prosecutor, John Alfred Preston, and recounted her tale to him. John believed none of it, but considered the detail where the victim's whole body had not been examined. The case was reopened and Dr. Knapp was summoned. The bewildered doctor recounted his failed attempts to examine her neck and realized the blunder he'd committed. Zona's body was exhumed and her neck was found to be broken. There were even fingerprint marks around her throat. Although these were not sturdy pieces of evidence against Shue, he was arrested and held without bail. On June 30th, 1897, Trout Shue's trial began. The prosecutor, John Preston, kept up a strong front and never faltered. However, he was worried about Mary Ann Heaster being presented as a witness, whose story about her daughter's ghost seemed unbelievable to him. But she was sworn in, and she told the court her story about her daughter's ghost, who told her the cause of her death. This evidence was not strong enough to charge Shue, but on his side the defense was weak, which proved to be lucky for Mary Ann. The jury took an hour and 10 minutes to decide and sentenced Shue to a lifetime of imprisonment. Considering the facts about Shue's previous marriages and the mysterious death of his second wife, it was the only opinion they could arrive at. He was sent away to the state prison in Moundsville, where he died after 3 years of an epidemic. The story of Zona Heaster and Trout Shue was the most infamous of their times. There were subsequent books published on their tale, like The Man Who Wanted 7 Wives by Katie Letcher Lyle. The story of the Greenbrier ghost, though enticing, is still a mystery. It is not yet known for sure whether Mary Ann was lying to frame her son-in-law Shue. However, it remains in the hearts of many people who consider it true.